think about it, we've been delivering projects for thousands of years. So how can we get better at it? If you think about it, we've, the tools we've got, they're getting better. We seem to be measuring things much better. We've got new methodologies, we've got agile. Personally, I'm a fan of extreme programming, which is a form of agile project management. So how come we have major project failures and they're a surprise? And they fail, and we only know about it when they've failed. So what I want to talk about is, instead of measuring time, cost, and quality, schedule, all sorts of physical things, what would happen if we added one more measurement to that list of physical measurements, and we measured what people were doing? Now, when I talk about measuring people, I don't mean sending the odd survey out to some stakeholders and seeing how things are going. I'm talking about the motivations and the way people are working inside the project and inside the project ecosystem. And then looking to see how that is going to affect the delivery of the project, and then seeing if we can change it. So if you walk away with something today, what I'd like you to walk away with is that maybe I can measure the way that people are affecting the way I'm going to deliver my project. I've got some ways that you can then use that information. Okay. But just to get things going, I think what we'll do is that we'll have a look at Mentimeter, and we'll ask a few questions, find out where people are, so I'll hand it back to Martin to actually run the Mentimeter questions to start with.
Cool. Right, here we go. So an interactive session. Can you see that, Kelvin?
Yep.
So the first question is about where you're all from. So we've got 62 people signed up so far. So if you go to menti.com and put the code 975661 in, please, and you'll be able to interact with Kelvin, because there's some more questions coming in a minute. And we've got 3 people from Asia, and most of them are from the UK.
So what happened to your geography there, Martin? The poor old person from Ireland looks like he's a long way from home.
Yeah, no. I did struggle with getting these countries to match the map, because it's laid out as sort of 9 equally distributed blobs. So I put Australia in, and I put Asia in the right place, and Europe and Africa and America, and then everybody else just had to fit in around it. So that's why it looks a bit weird. So it's just wallpaper on the back. It's not an interactive chart, unfortunately. So loads of people from England, a few from Scotland, 3 from Australasia. So you brought some of your colleagues along, which is cool.
Oh, that'll be my family.
Yeah, they're all going to rate you fantastic in a bit as well, I'm sure. So in terms of the community meetups, we've got a load of newbies, 50% newbies, which is great. So welcome everybody if this is your first one. So what we're trying to do is spread the word, and we've got quite a lot of these meetups in the pipeline as well. So you'll see in the next week. So follow me on LinkedIn. We'll be posting a lot of these, and I've gone around the world as well trying to find people. So these are people who's really at the top of the game and starting to push things. In terms of personality assessments and people's experience, do you want to talk through that one, Kelvin?
What have we got? So the most number we have is they have some utility at key stages. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I think I agree with that. I might talk a little bit more about that. Interesting, 24% of people haven't actually used them. That's quite surprising. I don't know that we'd have that in Australia. Would that be common in the UK, Martin?
I think it's a mixture of, there's some people who just started out, so there's some youngsters out there who's probably not seen it yet. They've not been trained on it. And if they're new to this discipline as well, maybe. So I think it's a bit of both, yeah. So in terms of measuring the human side of projects, there's a lot of comments there. So spreadsheets and one-to-ones, post-project feedback, job satisfaction. There's a few people who don't, or it's not applicable. 360-degree feedback there, retrospectives, qualitative feedback, KPIs, intuition, etc. and lots of people who don't do it or don't know, and none that I know of, etc. So that'll keep scrolling up. You got any comments on that, Kelvin?
Pretty much what I'd expect. There's some good things in there. Change management approaches, stakeholder management. In fact, we're going to go through that with the apprentices later on today, which was always good. Use Peakon, continuous listening to. I don't know what Peakon is, but continuous listening to team members sounds pretty good to me.
Cool. So, so I'll just put, if people have answered slide 6 yet, you've got some sort of premonition going on. You've not seen it. So, so I'll pass back to Kelvin now. So don't answer this one yet, please, because you've not seen slide 6. So I shall reset that slide if I can find out how to do it, and we'll pick that one up in a minute. So wait for slide 6. So Kelvin's back on. So back to you, Kelvin.
Okay, so what you can tell from that is that there's at least 6 slides. So let's see, let's get started. Oops, how do I? Okay, well, I'm going to talk about AI, and if I'm going to talk about AI, I've got to talk about privacy and ethics because this is really important. And if you have a look at what GDPR is, and there's an equivalent, which is suggesting that the person, an individual, is the person that has the rights that's associated with their data. Now, a lot of times when we've been working on projects in the past, we've assumed that the project has owned the data or the company has owned the data. So what we are trying to do is that we have temporary permission from an individual to use their data to make the project run better. And that's a fundamental change to the way that we often collect data otherwise. And it's really difficult to retrofit that. And GDPR, which I personally think is really good, they talk about privacy by design. And you can't really do this unless you start out by thinking about privacy. So the same thing goes for ethics. And it's pretty common knowledge that we're using AI will amplify any bias that you have and any unknown bias that you have. So it's really important that when you're using AI, that you're thinking about the questions that you want answered, and are they an appropriate question, and that you're using data which doesn't have any bias. And so I'll try and sort of touch on those things as we go through some of the things that we're talking about here. But the key thing here, remember, is that we are allowed temporarily to use somebody's data while we're providing them something which is useful. And we're doing that in a way which just doesn't disadvantage a proportion of the population. Okay, all right, so let's sort of go straight into it then, and then think about, I'll try and make this so that we look at this as a bit of a case study. So we have an organization, it's spent no money on any IT projects for years and years and years, got behind and desperately needed to do 3 major projects at the same time. Needed to upgrade its operational system, had to do an ERP upgrade, and at the same time, all of its infrastructure was failing, so they needed to do the data center, and at the same time, they thought they'd go to the cloud. So what I want to talk about is the way that you can use traditional project measurements to work out if the organization can deliver all 3 projects simultaneously. But I'll show you some new ways by measuring what the people that are involved in that ecosystem are doing. So first stage, let's look at the quality of the relationships and see how we can use that. So this is what we call a network map. NPS is what we call the meeting promoter score. It's a bit like Net Promoter Score, if you like, we give every individual their own Net Promoter Score based on the contribution that they're providing to the project. Each circle, you can see that has a color that is associated with the NPS from the scale on the right hand side. We also, the line between each of those circles is the strength of that relationship between those individuals. So there's about 9 people there in this particular group, or this particular project team. And what we can see here is that we have 2 people that have got a very low score. So we're able to visually show how this group of people is working. What we can do, which is cool, is that we can then say, let's change the shape of those circles depending on the role. So in the early days, we thought, well, why don't we put a square for a steering committee member, and let's have a circle for a project team member and see what the relationships are like. I was quite disappointed to find actually that they generally don't have a relationship. So that very, very few steering committee members actually relate with project team members. We had a lot more luck when we're actually dealing with stakeholders, because that was an interesting arrangement where we were able to show the relationships between project team members and stakeholders. Also, we've done some experiments by comparing different sets of consultants that are working on the same projects and examining the relationships between those. What was interesting to me was that I thought that the relationships between consultants from different consulting organisations would be very poor. But in actual fact, what we found is that the relationship between consultants from the same consulting organisation was actually very bad, and not normally as bad as the relationship that they had with other consulting organisations. So slightly counterintuitive, but I've since talked to people from some of the big 4 consulting, and they say that that's quite sort of accurate. So anyway, so if you're familiar with social network analysis or graph theory, and you're looking at this, you should be licking your lips. Okay, there is a huge number of mathematical things that we can do with this. And normally I would sort of talk about that, but I want to talk about comparing this to some other metrics at the same time. So, so this is the fabled slide 6 that we're going to ask you a question on. Okay. So where it says MQS, see that the grey bars going down. This is a single project team meeting from project B, and effectively that is the overall quality of the relationships, if you like, from the previous example, the average of all of those relationships between all of the people inside the meeting, and you can see that it's going down. PSP is project success probability. It's just simply, we just simply ask the project team what they think the probability of the project being successful is at each of those meetings during that week. So what we would like you to know, like to know from you, is to go to Mentimeter and to answer the question that's on Mentimeter on slide number 6. So I'll hand over to you, Martin, for that.
Yep, here we go. Let's start to build up. We've got 19 responses, 21. Don't be sucked into peer pressure. Don't go with the crowd. And if you start to think about the following question as well for people who's answered it. Don't answer the following question just yet. I think Kelvin's going to walk you through it, but start to think about it. So we'll wait for it to tick up to about 70, 75, something like that. A few more. Right, Kelvin, we'll pass back to you.
Okay. So that's interesting. So, so I think I agree. Things do get tougher as the project progresses, 33. And there is a little bit of forming, storming, and norming. But
They could just show us that forming, storming, norming on your chart, Kelvin.
yeah, okay. Oh, there it is.
Just stop share.
Yeah, got it. Okay. Can you see my cursor?
Yep.
You can. Okay. So we think that the forming, norming, and storming would be in this particular part in here. So we definitely agree there's some things happening in here. And I do agree with the comment which says as the project gets going, and particularly as it nears the end, what you have is that times will get tough, and you do have to push your way through it. However, what we see here is that the project success probability is holding steady, sort of around 80%. That's a really high score, by the way, is it? So, and what these here, the quality of the relationships is continuing to decline. So what we're doing is that people are working harder to deliver the project, and the relationships are suffering at the same time. I agree that things get tougher as you go along. You cannot keep going at this rate here. You cannot keep burning the relationships at this rate and expect the project to succeed. You better be delivering it really, really soon. And what we know from our data is that this is about as far as you can go in terms of a divergence between the project success probability and the MQS, or the quality of the relationships, if you like, before the actual team succumbs to this being a problem.
A couple of questions have come in, Kelvin. Could you give us a quick overview of PSP and MQS in terms of the way it's calculated?
Okay, yep. So let's do PSP, that's the easy one. Okay, so we just ask every member of the project team at each of those meetings for what they think the probability of the project being successful is. It's just the average of that number between 0 and 100. So just a straight piece of perception, really, really easy. The MQS, if we, can I go backwards here? So you remember the quality of all of these relationships that we worked out before. This is an approximation because it's not 100%, but it's near enough. If you work out the quality of these relationships and you say, here's the average quality of these relationships over time, that's what we call the MQS, and that's that grey line that's going down.
Cool.
Is that right?
Okay, cool. Yeah, works for me.
Works for you? Okay, good. Then in that case, I think we better go to the next question in the Mentimeter then. What happens in the reverse? So we're saying at the moment we've got the PSP, which is holding up, but the quality of the relationships is going down. What happens? What do you think it could be if the quality of the relationships is going up, but everybody thinks the project's going to fail? That's the project success probability. So I'll hand that over to you. Let's sort of see what people are thinking it might be. Martin.
There you go. We've had some more questions coming, but I'm struggling to run. I've got like 3 screens going now, so I'll come back to those questions when we've finished on here. So there you go, Kelvin. There's some comments back.
They were complacent. Rock's drift. What's Rock's drift?
It's a film. I don't know.
Yeah.
So any of those you'd like to pick up?
Yeah, so I don't know, many transport projects, some government projects. Okay. I've seen this on some government projects. Yeah. Great team working in a working environment. Yes, that's good. Good. Risk wrongly assessed. Yeah. Another good one. No one accepts responsibility for the failure. Need delivery manager ensuring deadlines are met. Yes. Team find a way of turning the project around. Groupthink. Good thought. Yeah. Okay. Hard to say without knowing what I mean by the quality of the relationships.
So I
Okay.
think there's some questions about what do you mean by the quality of the relationship, Kelvin? That's come up a few times now.
Okay. So
Should I pass back to you? Any more of these you want to pick up?
yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. So when I talk about the quality of the relationships, I talk about each individual assessing the impact of every other individual in whatever setting they're in. And in this case, we're talking about a project team, which looks at the contribution of the other project team members. We add that up, and then we give them a net promoter score. And that's what I mean by the quality of the relationships.
Okay.
If I was to, let me go back to I'm having trouble with my screen here.
There's a definition of the Orcs drift now as well. Zulu War, most number of VCs, 1 for 1 battle.
Yeah.
Very good.
Okay, so when we first saw this, we didn't know what it was. We're like, okay, why? I mean, we thought we were pretty clever when we found this idea that we worked out when a team was being burnt to deliver a project. But when we had the opposite, we thought, what could be causing the quality of the relationships to everybody to be going really, really well, but everyone thinks the project's going to fail. And eventually, we sort of, after a bit of investigation, we found that in most cases where this occurs, it's what I call a zombie project. It's, look, we've told management, we've told the team leaders, we've told everybody that this is going to fail. I'm not going to put any discretionary effort in. I'm going to put my discretionary effort into actually into working with my team. And effectively, this project is dead in the water. In fact, it's normally so bad that you can't stop it and give it a new name and start it again. So you have to do a rethink. So, and yeah, so when someone said it was a government organisation was the first time we saw that. So it is the most dangerous of the lead indicators that we've got for a project. And we haven't seen a project that's got into that stage recover. Okay. Let's see if I can move to, okay. So obviously, that was in the early stages of what I showed you was in the early stages of Project B. What I wanted to say, okay, so what ended up happening to Project B? Well, we have to say it's pretty grim. If you have a look here, Project B, we had some results coming from the steering committee, we had some results coming from the project team, and we had some result coming from the stakeholders. So as predicted, the quality of the relationships deteriorated, and then everybody thought, and the project team thought it was going to fail. If we go further along and look at the stakeholders actually think there's even less chance of it being delivered, mainly because they can see that the project team's in disarray. But then again, if we look at the steering committee on Project B, it's pretty confident. In fact, it's more confident about Project B than it is about Project A and Project C. This is a bit of a wake-up call because at this stage, the organisation actually believes that this project is actually going well from its normal project reporting, and it's actually not. It's in pretty desperate trouble. The one interesting thing out of this is the quality of the relationships inside the steering committee for Project B at 54%. It's pretty low as well. So there's some people in there that aren't that happy with the idea that this is actually working as well as probably is what they're being led to believe. This is the normal way where we actually think that the communications going to the steering committee is, shall we say, over-optimistic. Okay. Project A is interesting. It's the project team, and project team always knows first what's happening. They believe that that might be some trouble that may or may not be an issue. Project C seems to be under control. Okay. Let's see if I can sort of build out a few more things to look at, as to say, okay, well, okay, project B is not going so well. What else can we use? Now, this is the leadership team. This is a DISC model. Now, you don't have to use DISC. You can pretty much use any of the profiles just to see how the actual members of the leadership team are working together and what their working style is. But in this case, I think DISC is quite good. You should also think about not just doing the self-assessment, but doing some 360-degree views on the DISC profiles of each of the members, or Big Five, MBTI, or all of them at once, which is quite possible using some of the cool stuff that's. If we look at this, the results here is that pretty much everyone's a D except for this person down here in the green, and so that particular person will need to cover some gaps in the profiles of all of the other Ds, and we'll probably have a pretty grim time of it. So there's a lot of literature around this from each of those profiles. It says, okay, here's the makeup of a team, and here's things to watch out for. So this comes straight from one of those sites around this, about what this team makeup might look like. But the same goes for MBTI, so on.
There's some really good stuff on this on Praxis as well. So a chap called Donny McNichol's been working this up with the Praxis team. So it's all available for free through Praxis, Praxis. So have a look at that, check that out, everybody.
Yeah, and I'd recommend that as well. Okay, so let's go back to the early days of Project B. Let's start to measure a few more things. So let's talk about the vision. Okay, so on the left-hand graph here, you have a few stakeholders, I think, that looked at this, maybe 15 stakeholders. The stakeholder on the top right found the project vision compelling and thinks that there's a really strong probability of the project being delivered. This particular person here didn't think much of the project vision and thought that you're pretty useless, actually. There's no way you're going to deliver anything because you only got a 40% chance of delivering it. So we desperately hope that's not the sponsor. So what we then do is...
You got Watson on there. What does Watson mean? Can you just explain that?
Oh, okay. So sorry, Watson. Watson is IBM's Watson. You're probably familiar with it. It beat the world chess champion, I think, and the world Go champion, I think. Effectively, it's you can give it some text and a whole lot of other stuff, and it will take the sentiment from that. So what we do is that we split out what the project team thinks and what the stakeholders think. And then we measure some emotions, and typically we measure things like anger, fear, joy, sadness, and and we measure the intensity of that, and that's something that we do in conjunction with IBM. So in this particular case, what we have here is that the light grey bars you can see is what's coming from the project team, and they're joyful and confident, really, and sort of, whereas the stakeholders themselves are fearful and tentative, and actually quite fearful in this case, in terms of what was being served up to them from Project B. Okay. Then I want to sort of go a little bit later on. Okay, so the interesting thing to watch from here is that these blue dots have gone to the left. So in effect, that they still think the project's going to be delivered, but there's less vision. Now when you have projects going where there is not much of a vision, or the stakeholders are going, there's not much of a vision.
Element echo.
Yeah.
Is your phone going, sir?
There we go. Oh, that's good. So when you have stakeholders who believe that there is not much of a project vision, it generally is because the project team has made too many compromises, and generally there's something around the governance of the project which allows it to make that many compromises, which should be questioned. Okay, so often, and you can see, oh yes, there's my. Often we have organisations, when you go to the left of where I've got the cursor, we say you should redo the business case because you've actually got limited benefits being delivered, too many compromises. Another marker as to some things inside Project B aren't going quite so well is what's happened to Watson. Remember, you had the joyful and confident project team. Well, they've lost that, and they're now analytical, and they're quite analytical while they're trying to convince everybody that everything's okay, nothing to see here. Whereas the stakeholders, they were fearful. Okay, their fears have now been realised, and they're now sad. Okay, that's not good, but at least it's not anger. What we find when there's anger, that means that sadness is passive, anger is active. And if you have some stakeholders who are angry and getting angrier, then that's a key determinant of things where you're going to have to act to change something. Okay. Right. Are we getting any questions about that? Is that so?
No, I don't think so. We've got about 5 minutes left, Kelvin, and then that gives a few minutes for questions as well.
Oh, really? Okay, I've got to put a wriggle on. Okay. All right. Meantime, Project A, it's going reasonably well. We wanted to see why we had a bit of a problem. You can see that we have a bit of sadness, which has just popped its head up, but nothing too much to worry about. Okay. All right. So how do we know that we've got that we can deliver the project, all three projects at once? This is a pulse snapshot that we have from measuring the entire organisation. Each dot is a person. There's a couple of thousand people in there, and you can see that there's a lot of angry and scared people. Okay, too many angry and scared people, and so there's definitely a problem. Okay, so we're going to struggle to deliver something in that environment. I'm going to come back to that slide in a minute. Okay, all right. I haven't got time to talk about this, but essentially,
you've probably got a few more minutes, Kelvin. You know, there's not
okay.
a huge amount of questions coming through, so maybe you got another 8 minutes or something.
Okay, I'll slow down about this because this one here is really interesting, because what we do when we start a project off, or a portfolio of projects, is that we normally get the business case, and that gives us the value, and then we do a risk assessment, and if we're any good, we'll continue to do the risk assessment during the project itself. But we very rarely get the opportunity to actually update this, what I've called scenario 1 here. What I've shown you from the preceding slides allows us to update this in real time with the way that people are thinking. We need to do a bit of jiggery-pokery with that and some mathematics on that. But we're able to actually update this so that it actually reflects reality. What we can do then is we can borrow some things from the finance world, and we can use what they call the efficient frontier, which allows you to calculate the portfolio of projects for a given beta of your organization. It throws up some interesting results, and certainly if you've got some sacred cows in there which you're not allowed to stop, it will actually ask you why you're actually continuing with them, because it doesn't fit inside your portfolio and the risk that your company wants to have. We also do have the opportunity to do some other things, which is where we can get multiple scenarios, and from those multiple scenarios we can then say, okay, here's the average risk and value of each of the projects. That's interesting, but not as interesting as the standard deviation of those multiple scenarios, because that allows us to work out the resilience of the project or projects. It could go even further than that, and this is something that we're currently working on, is that I believe that that the coefficients of the change between the scenarios of each of the projects allows you to approximate project dependencies. Do that for certain, but the next time that you come to listen to talk, I can probably tell you whether we can take a lot of work out of being able to work out project dependencies just by simply running a few scenarios. We won't be exactly right, but we'll certainly get you a long way along the way. Anyway, I'll move on. So what we now have an awful lot of information about individuals. Okay, and we're starting to get to some of the key takeaways. So I think that you can split your targeted, or the people that you're working with or want to actually influence, into strategic, logical, tactical, or relationship-based people. We can then, from there, we can then send them, if we're communicating, we can communicate with them in the way that they would like to be communicated with. I'll give you an example. So remember this graph from earlier, which was the artificial intelligence results that came back from the employee or the pulse survey. Look at the number of analytical people. Now, in this particular organization, what they were trying to do was they were trying to capture the hearts and minds of all of these analytical people, but they didn't give them enough information. So they supplied their own information, which meant that they created all this anger and fear. And so when we went and talked to the people and says, let's give more detailed information, we're able to see the anger and the fear actually dropping away and making it more realistic so that we could deliver some of the projects. So I remember talking to Martin recently about this. So he says, so does the project, whenever it sends out a communication, have to do 4 separate communications to a group of individuals? And so the short answer is yes, but what we are now, we're in the days of AI where we're able to say, here's a piece of communication that we'd like to go to a group of our stakeholders or a group of whatever, and we can automatically write in the style of each of those particular 4 dimensions for those people. And we even have the opportunity to have exactly the right tone for each person that we're sending that to. Now, we're not quite there yet, but that's what we're currently working on, as to how we can actually create a message that would be in the best way for a person to receive it at that time. So it can be time-based as well, because there's lots of things that we know about all of the people that are inside an organization or even outside an organization. Okay. So, so what I want to do then is for you to think about this. So let's see if we can measure relationships, perception, working style, and emotion. Use that information to remediate or to actually personalize communications to the way that people are actually working or feeling at the time. Use that to course correct or even interventions. Then we can use, once we've done that, we can almost immediately see what the effect of that is and predict what's going to happen from there. So if you take nothing else away from today, I think that there's an opportunity to add this additional layer to the way that you run projects. Okay, so how did we get on with the projects? Well, you could pretty easily see that project B wasn't going to work. And so really shortly after this piece of analysis, the project manager was actually, it was suggested that they might like to move on. So project A, unfortunately, 6 months later, it also needed to be stopped to be delivered to project C, because project C was by far the most difficult project. So let me just summarize here. Sorry, I've gone through the last bit really quickly, but anyway. So in summary, mapping the quality of relationships, monitoring perception, working styles and emotions allows us to send actions and communications to individuals in their preferred receiving. And hopefully this is something that you'll think about using in addition to the standard project controls and measurements in the future. Thank you, Mark.
Okay, that's superb. Thank you, Kelvin. Really appreciate it. So a big round of applause for me. Everybody else who's in there, thank you very much. Excellent stuff. There's some more questions in the Mentimeter pack. So we've got 22 responses to the impact that this is going to have. You know, has it changed how you would manage the human side of projects? So if you can answer that, and you can answer some more questions in the pack. If you've got any more questions for Kelvin as well, please send them through. There's a point that personality type based tools such as DISC and others don't take into account the context and that human behavior is dynamic, and that how we perceive situations is also based on our cognitive, social and emotional intelligence. Have you got anything to add to that?
So that's getting a bit deep for me, is it? So I don't profess to be a psychologist. I'm an engineer. What I'm trying to do is that I'm trying to provide a number of tools and a number of ways of looking at things. And I don't know if I've explained it very well, but I think that I've shown you 7 here today, but there are more that you can do. And what we're looking to do is to say, here's the preponderance of evidence around certain things which suggest that we can run our projects better. So good question. That sounds like somebody who knows more about this than I do.
Right, I'll just give some more feedback from Menti. Let me share my screen. There we go. Let's just get rid of that chat. There we go. So in terms of 36% of people think it's very compelling, 52% think it's worth a look, 2%, which is one person, probably 2 people now, don't think it's got the application, and 9% the jury's out. So I think, you know, bearing in mind this is a project data analytics community, we've got quite a lot of forward-looking people. So I think the overall balance of that is, you know, it's got application, it's definitely worth a look, and some people think it's really compelling. Now, I'd agree with that. I think, you know, all of these techniques in one go is probably a lot to swallow for an organization, and especially in the current climate when your sort of buildings on fire. But I think there's an application of this, even understanding things like working from home as well. So, you know, what's the impact on projects of people working from home? Is the team dynamics starting to break apart and all that sort of stuff? So I think there's a new dimension to this. Kelvin, is that anything you've been looking at?
Exactly. Well, is it so? As it turned out, it was like really useful for projects because once you move from predominantly face-to-face to predominantly remote, you've lost an anchor in terms of what the quality of those relationships are. What's your quality of the relationship you have with other people? How are we actually being effective when we're actually comparing things? So yes. So I've noticed a real uptick in interest in some of the work that we've been doing around this since we've gone remote, when people are working remote with projects.
Cool. I've only got 27 responses on this one, so if there's anybody out there, give us some more comments and some feedback. We'd be very grateful indeed. So it all helps because Kelvin will be back one day. We'll bring him back to update us in terms of where he is and give us some more case studies and some more insights as well. So if there's no more questions, we'll close it here and say once again a big thanks to Kelvin for dialing in.